Have you ever wondered why certain people arouse an irrational irritation in you? Or why you repeat the same patterns of self-sabotage, even knowing they destroy you? The answer is not outside, but within in the most denied and repressed part of your psyche, the shadow. In this deep dive into Carl Jung's analytical psychology, we will unravel the concept of the shadow archetype. This is not just a video about the dark side. It is a journey of self-knowledge to understand how the denial of our most primitive impulses, fears, and desires creates an invisible prison around us. By repressing who we really are, we project onto others what we do not have the courage to face in ourselves. Learn to identify the manifestations of the shadow in your daily life, from projections and judgments to Freudian slips and disturbing dreams. Discover how the process of integrating the shadow true personal growth does not mean eliminating it, but rather bringing its energy into consciousness. It is in this courageous confrontation that we find the gold in the darkness, our creativity, our life force, and the path to a liberating authenticity. This video is an essential guide for anyone seeking to stop living a fragmented life and yearning for wholeness. If you are ready for true personal development and to reclaim the power that exists in your unconscious, this journey is for you. Let's start with a question you may have never dared to ask yourself out loud. Who are you when no one is looking? Not the person you show on your social media, not the professional mask you wear every day, not even the image you project to your family. Who are you in the absolute silence of your being? In that intimate space where your most unspeakable thoughts roam free. If the answer frightens you, or if what emerges is an empty silence, then you have already felt its presence. The shadow. It is not a malevolent entity, not a demon in the literal sense. It is, far more disturbingly, your own unlived life. It is the invisible architect of your failures, the secret scriptwriter of your repetitive tragedies, the ghost in the machine of your existence. Think of it as a secret government within your psyche, operating from a dark basement while your consciousness, the figurehead president, believes it is in command. This hidden government is formed by every impulse you learn to repress, every emotion that was judged as unacceptable, every talent that was abandoned out of fear or shame, your natural aggressiveness, your raw sexuality, your vulnerability, your laziness, your greed. Everything that did not align with the ideal of a good person imposed upon you was exiled to this inner realm. But exile is not death. In the dark, these parts of you did not disappear. They united, fermented, and gained an autonomous force. The shadow is the sum of all your denied potential. It is the artist you strangled to become a pragmatic employee, the rebel you silenced to be accepted, the wild lover you castrated to keep the peace. And that is why it sabotages you. Every time you procrastinate on an important project, every time a disproportionate rage explodes at an inappropriate moment, every time you find yourself drawn to people or situations you know will destroy you, it is the shadow reclaiming what is rightfully its, your attention, your energy, your life. It does not wish you harm. It wants your wholeness, and it will continue to set your manifest world on fire until you find the courage to go down to the basement and face it. It is your inverted reflection, your dark night of the soul personified, the guardian of a treasure you didn't even know you had lost. Ignoring it is not an option, it is a sentence, the sentence of living a life half-lived, haunted by the ghost of who you could have been. The shadow is not a manufacturing defect. No one is born with it fully formed. It is a construction, a psychic scar sculpted over time by the most powerful and, at the same time, cruelest tool in the universe, the need for love. Go back, for a moment, to the child you were, a being of pure expression, a bundle of instincts and emotions in their purest form. In that primordial state, there was no good or bad. There was only being. You felt anger and you expressed it. You felt joy and you radiated it. You felt selfishness and you practiced it. But this initial totality could not survive contact with the world. The world demanded adaptation, and adaptation demanded sacrifice. It was then that you heard the first sentences. Stop crying. That's weakness. Don't be loud. It's annoying. Share your toy. Don't be selfish. Dreaming of being an artist doesn't pay the bills. Each of these phrases, often said with the best of intentions by parents, teachers, and society, acted like a chisel, beginning the painful process of sculpting your acceptable persona. To secure love, safety, and belonging, you began the great work of your life, self-amputation. With unconscious surgical precision, you began to cut off and repress the parts of yourself that were not applauded. Your wild spontaneity was exchanged for polished behavior. Your transgressive curiosity was replaced by obedience. Your deep sadness was hidden under a forced smile. And each of these amputated fragments was thrown into the dark basement of the psyche. But here lies a crucial secret. You did not only repress the bad, you also repressed the good. This is what we call the golden shadow. Perhaps your creative genius was repressed because your family only valued the security of a stable job. Perhaps your immense leadership capacity was seen as arrogance, and so you hid it. Perhaps your deep sensitivity was labeled as drama, and you learned to become cold and indifferent. The shadow, therefore, is not just a trash bag for your flaws. It is also a locked vault where some of your greatest gifts are stored. The basement of your psyche is not a cemetery, but an overcrowded orphanage full of versions of you that are alive, pulsating, and desperate for recognition. Your repressed self is not your enemy. It is the child you abandoned in order to survive. Understanding this is fundamental, as it changes everything. It is not about blaming your parents or society. It is about recognizing that the mechanism that protected you in childhood now imprisons you in adulthood. And the key to this prison is not in building higher walls, but in finally going down to the orphanage and starting to call each of these abandoned children by name. You can try to ignore the shadow, lock it in the basement, and throw away the key. But the psyche is like water. It always finds a crack to leak through. The shadow does not remain passive in the unconscious. It is constantly communicating, trying to break through the veil of consciousness. If you learn to listen to its language, you will realize that it leaves clues everywhere, like footprints at the scene of a crime against yourself. The most common and most revealing sign is projection. Think of that person who deeply irritates you, who activates a fierce and instantaneous judgment in you. Your boss's arrogance, your colleague's laziness, that acquaintance's phoniness. This intense emotional charge you feel is not about them. It is a movie, and the projector is inside you. You are projecting onto them a part of your own shadow, a quality that you have repressed in yourself and cannot bear to see reflected in the world. The hatred you feel is, in fact, a distorted form of self-knowledge knocking at your door. Another clear sign is Freudian slips and slips of the tongue. That wrong word that slips out at a crucial moment, revealing a truth you were trying to hide. That important appointment you forgot, sabotaging an opportunity. This is not chance. It is the shadow, like a skilled hacker, breaking into the operating system of your persona and inserting its own commands. They are rebellions in miniature, small acts of psychic insurrection. Pay attention also to your disproportionate emotional reactions. A small criticism that triggers a volcanic fury. A minor obstacle that leads you to an abyssal despair. When the reaction is much greater than the trigger, it is because the trigger has activated not only the present event, but also the vast reserve of repressed emotional energy stored in the shadow. It is the pain of an old wound that has been touched. At night, the shadow speaks more directly through your dreams. Recurring dreams, nightmares, frightening or dark figures that pursue you. These figures are not external monsters. They are personifications of your shadow aspects. The pursuer in the dream is your repressed ambition hunting you. The monster is your bottled-up anger. Dialoguing with these figures, instead of fleeing from them, is one of the most powerful forms of integration. Finally, the shadow manifests in the body. Anxiety without an apparent cause, chronic pain, psychosomatic illnesses. The body becomes the stage where the shadow enacts the drama that consciousness refuses to watch. Your body screams the truths that your mouth silences. Learning to read these signs is like learning a new language, the language of your own soul. It is the first step to stop being a victim of circumstances and start becoming a decipherer of the mysteries of your own psyche. In our culture, which idolizes light and fears darkness, the pursuit of perfection is sold as the greatest of virtues. But from the soul's point of view, this pursuit is the most dangerous of pathologies. To live denying one's own shadow, striving to be only good, pure, and correct, is like trying to live by breathing only oxygen and rejecting carbon dioxide. It is an imbalance that inevitably leads to psychic suffocation. The first cost of this denial is the loss of vitality. Psychic energy, just like physical energy, needs to flow. When you repress parts of yourself, you are, in practice, building dams in the river of your own life force. The result is a life that may seem correct and organized on the surface, but which is stagnant, gray, boring, and devoid of passion on the inside. It is the so-called unlived life, an existence of survival instead of living, marked by a subtle depression and a chronic feeling that something is missing. That something is yourself. The second danger is possession. An ignored shadow does not stay quiet forever. It accumulates energy, like pressure in a boiler, and eventually it explodes. This explosion can manifest in various ways. It can be a nervous breakdown. It can be an impulsive and self-destructive act that annihilates a marriage, a career, or a lifetime's reputation. It is the case of the pastor who preaches against sin and is caught in a scandal, or the politician who defends morality and is exposed in corruption. This is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It is the shadow, starved and neglected, that takes control of the individual and forces them to live out exactly what they have most repressed. It is the archetypal story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The more Victorian and repressed Dr. Jekyll is, the more monstrous and violent his alter ego, Mr. Hyde, becomes. Furthermore, the denial of the shadow makes us dangerously naive and highly judgmental. He who does not recognize the potential for evil within himself is unable to recognize and deal with it effectively in others. He becomes easy prey for manipulators and, at the same time, a moralistic tyrant who projects his own unrecognized darkness onto others, seeing evil everywhere except where it really matters, within himself. The final cost of false perfection is the loss of humanity. To be human is not to be a plaster saint on an altar. It is to be a battlefield where light and darkness, virtue and vice, creation and destruction collide. To accept the shadow is not to surrender to darkness. It is to become a complete human being, aware of all your potential, and only then, from that awareness, to make truly ethical choices. To ignore it is to remain a frightened child, pretending to be an angel and living in fear of the monster it has created. Of all the mechanisms through which the shadow reveals itself, none is as treacherous and, at the same time, as luminous as projection. Projection is the unconscious act of attributing to another person a quality, a feeling, or a trait that, in fact, belongs to you, but which your consciousness refuses to accept. It is a defense mechanism of the ego that says, "This is not mine. It is his." The world, then, transforms into a vast cinema screen where you project the secret films of your inner life, and the people around you become the involuntary actors in your psychic drama. To understand its power, just observe your emotional reactions. An exaggerated admiration, an idolatry bordering on devotion, is often a projection of your golden shadow. When you see in a hero, a mentor, or a celebrity a courage, a talent, or a freedom that fascinates you, it is very likely that you are projecting your own unrealized heroic potential. You have exiled your own greatness and now worship it from the outside. To reclaim this projection means to recognize that the quality you so admire in the other exists, in a latent state, within you, waiting to be cultivated. The inverse and more common mechanism is negative projection. Think again of the person you can't stand. List, with brutal honesty, the characteristics that repel you in them. Is it their arrogance, their need for attention, their dishonesty, their weakness? Now, prepare for the most difficult and transformative step. This list is not an accurate portrait of the other person. It is a detailed map of your shadow. The intensity of your emotional reaction is the exact measure of the intensity with which you have repressed that same quality in yourself. You might defend yourself, saying, "But I'm not arrogant. I'm humble." And that is precisely where the shadow operates. Perhaps you have so repressed your healthy self-confidence for fear of seeming arrogant that now any display of security by another person becomes unbearable. The projection is the hook. The other person may even have a bit of that characteristic, but your explosive reaction and your relentless judgment are entirely yours. Working with projection is one of the most direct paths to shadow integration. The exercise is simple but requires immense courage. Every time you feel activated by someone, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, What exactly in this person is bothering me so much? And where, in what way, even in a 1% version, does this characteristic live within me? This act of introspection is like pulling the projector back to yourself. It is to stop blaming the screen and start examining the film that is running internally. It is a painful work, as it destroys our self-image as innocent victims and forces us to take responsibility for our own darkness. But it is also the quickest path to freedom, because by withdrawing our projections from the world, we reclaim an immense amount of psychic energy that was previously spent on judging, hating, and fighting against our own reflections. So far, we have talked about identifying, understanding, and tracking the shadow. But knowledge by itself does not heal. There comes a moment when theory must become flesh, when analysis must give way to experience. The moment of the encounter arrives. This is not a step for the faint of heart. It is the hero's journey, the descent into the underworld, the catabasis of ancient myths. It is the moment when you stop fleeing the monster in the labyrinth of your psyche and voluntarily turn to face it. The first requirement for this encounter is not strength, but humility. The ego, with its armor of certainties and its polished self-image, must be left at the door. You do not go down to the basement to fight, to conquer, or to annihilate the shadow. To try to do so would be like trying to destroy your own liver because it produces bile. The shadow is an integral part of you. The correct attitude is that of a diplomat, not a warrior. You go down to listen, to dialogue, to understand. The first practical step is radical self-observation without judgment. It is the act of becoming an impartial witness to your own thoughts, feelings, and impulses. When envy rises, instead of being ashamed and repressing it, observe it. How does it feel in your body? What thoughts does it bring? What does it desire? When anger explodes, instead of acting on it or blaming yourself for feeling it, just observe it. What is its message? What boundary has been violated? What need has not been met? This act of witnessing creates a crucial space between impulse and action. In that space, consciousness can operate. You stop being possessed by the emotion and begin to relate to it. The second step is to give a name and a form to your shadow. Personify it. If your shadow were a creature, what would it look like? If it had a voice, what would it say? You can do this through writing, drawing, or active imagination. Talk to it. Ask it why it sabotages you, what it fears, what it yearns for. At first, the answers may be shocking, childish, or immoral. The shadow speaks the language of instinct, not reason. It might say, I want to destroy everything because I feel powerless, or I want all the attention because I feel invisible. Your task is not to judge these answers, but to listen to them with compassion. Remember, you are talking to the wounded and abandoned parts of yourself. This encounter is terrifying because it threatens to destroy the idealized image you have of yourself. It forces you to admit, yes, I am capable of cruelty. Yes, I am capable of envy. Yes, I am capable of selfishness. But it is only through this radical acceptance of your totality that true transformation can begin. By facing the monster, you discover that it is not just a monster. It is the guardian of a treasure. And by listening to it, you begin to receive the keys to unlock your own power. The encounter with the shadow is not a what-I'm event, but a continuous process, a dance that lasts a lifetime. To navigate this dance, we need practical tools, maps, and compasses for the territory of the unconscious. These are not self-help techniques to fix yourself, but sacred practices to cultivate a relationship with the deepest parts of your being. The first and oldest tool is attention to dreams. Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. During sleep, the ego's defenses are lowered, and the shadow can communicate more freely through symbols and narratives. Keeping a dream journal by the bed is essential. Upon waking, write down everything you remember without interpreting. Just record the images, the feelings, the figures. Then reflect. Every element of the dream is a part of you. The haunted house is your psyche. The monster chasing you is an aspect of yourself you are avoiding. The lost treasure is a potential of yours that needs to be rescued. By asking yourself, what is this part of me trying to tell me? You transform the dream from a random nightly event into a vital message from your soul. The second tool, developed by Jung, is active imagination. This is a more advanced and powerful technique. It involves entering a meditative state and focusing on an image from a dream or an uncomfortable feeling. Instead of just thinking about it, you allow the image to come to life and interact with it as if in a waking dream. You can dialogue with the figures that emerge. Ask your inner critic why it is so harsh. Ask your anxiety what it is really afraid of. The key is not to direct the fantasy, but to allow it to unfold on its own, acting as a conscious participant. It is a way of deliberately descending into the unconscious and negotiating directly with its forces. Expressive writing is another accessible and profound tool. Give your shadow a voice. Set aside some time and a notebook and write from its perspective. Let it express all its anger, its pain, its envy, without censorship. Don't worry about grammar or coherence. Just channel that energy onto the paper. This act of giving voice to what has been silenced can be immensely cathartic and revealing. You may discover that behind the anger, there is deep sadness, and behind the envy, a yearning for self-expression. Finally, any form of nonverbal creative expression, painting, dance, music, sculpture can be a bridge to the shadow. Sometimes, repressed emotions are pre-verbal, too old to be put into words. Allowing your body or your hands to express themselves freely can bring dark contents to the surface in a safe and contained way. Painting your anger or dancing your sadness can process the energy in a way that intellectual analysis never could. These tools are not quick fixes. They are lifelong practices, ways to keep the channel of communication with your deepest self always open. The most paradoxical and beautiful part of shadow work is the discovery that the goal of the descent into hell is not just to survive it, but to plunder its treasures. The ancient alchemical maxim, in Sterquilini's Inventure, "It is in filth that it is found," is the key here. What we consider our psychological waste, our most shameful traits, and our darkest impulses, contains the gold of our individuality. The integration of the shadow is not an exercise in moral masochism. It is a treasure hunt. Every quality you have repressed and exiled to the shadow has a dual nature. It has a destructive and primitive aspect, but it also contains the core of a vital force and a powerful virtue. The task of integration is to rescue this energy, separate it from its destructive expression, and place it at the service of consciousness. Think of anger in its dark and unconscious form. It manifests as blind rage, cruelty, passive aggression, and resentment. But if you bring this energy into consciousness, if you integrate it, you will discover that at the heart of anger lies the fire of assertion, the ability to set healthy boundaries, the courage to fight for justice, and the strength to say no. Integrated anger is not destructive. It is the energy of life protecting and asserting itself in the world. Consider laziness, one of the most condemned sins in our productivity-driven culture. In the shadow, it manifests as procrastination, apathy, and self-sabotage. But when integrated, the energy of laziness reveals its other side, the capacity for deep relaxation, for contemplation, for non-doing, which is the source of all creativity and intuition. Integrated laziness is the wisdom of knowing when to stop and simply be. And what about greed? In its shadow form, it is insatiable and selfish accumulation. But in its energetic essence lies ambition, the desire to grow, to expand, to build, to have an impact on the world. Fear, when repressed, becomes paralyzing anxiety and phobia. When integrated, it becomes prudence, wisdom, discernment, and respect for real dangers. The same goes for the golden shadow. The sensitivity that was repressed for being weakness contains the gift of empathy and art. The rebelliousness that was punished contains the spirit of innovation and reform. The process of rescuing this gold is what the alchemists called solve et coagula. Dissolve the repressed form and coagulate the energy into a new, more conscious and mature form. That is why the journey into the shadow, though frightening, is the ultimate source of authenticity and personal power. You stop trying to be an impoverished and perfect version of yourself and start becoming the complete, complex, and vibrant version you were born to be. True strength lies not in having no darkness, but in having descended into it and returned with its treasures in hand. As we advance on this journey, it is crucial to clarify one of the biggest and most dangerous misunderstandings about shadow work. The goal is not, and can never be, to eliminate the shadow. Trying to annihilate it would be not only impossible but disastrous. Likewise, the goal is also not to become the shadow, surrendering to its primitive impulses in a celebration of chaos. Both paths, that of the saint who denies the darkness and that of the libertine who denies the light, lead to disintegration. The true path is the middle way, the path of integration. To integrate means to make whole. It means building a psyche broad enough to contain the opposites. It is a process of expanding consciousness so that it can encompass both your social persona and your shadow self without being possessed by either. In this new configuration, the ego is no longer the tyrant who represses, nor the victim who is dominated. The ego takes on a new role, that of a conscious mediator. It becomes the central axis that can hold the tension between light and darkness, between what society expects of you and what your deepest instincts demand. To live this way is to live with a tragic, yet also heroic, consciousness. It is to know that you are capable of terrible acts, but to consciously choose not to commit them. It is to feel envy, but to use it as fuel for your own growth, instead of using it to diminish another. It is to feel rage, but to channel it into constructive change, instead of blind destruction. An integrated person is not a nice person. They can, in fact, be much more dangerous to false structures than a repressed person, because they have access to all their energy. But they are dangerous in the sense of a force of nature, conscious of their power, and able to use it wisely. The goal of life, from a Jungian perspective, is not happiness, which is a fleeting byproduct, nor perfection, which is a paralyzing neurosis. The goal is wholeness. To be whole is to be paradoxical. It is to be kind and firm. It is to be vulnerable and strong. It is to be spiritual and earthy. It is to be able to love deeply and, if necessary, to fight fiercely. It is to accept that you are a universe of contradictions and to learn to orchestrate this complex symphony instead of trying to silence the instruments that frighten you. The integration of the shadow is a process that never ends. There will always be new layers of the unconscious to be explored, new aspects to be brought to light. But with each step, you become more real, more authentic, and more indestructibly human. You stop fighting the war against yourself and finally find a peace that comes not from the absence of conflict, but from the ability to contain it within your own heart. The journey we have taken so far, as intimate and personal as it may seem, does not happen in a vacuum. Each individual psyche is a microcosm of the macrocosm of the collective psyche. And just as each of us has a personal shadow formed by our individual repressions, humanity as a whole in its tribes, nations, and cultures has a vast and terrifying collective shadow. This shadow is the repository of everything a group of people refuses to acknowledge about itself. Its latent brutality, its xenophobia, its greed, its thirst for power. And the mechanism that operates on a macro scale is exactly the same as the one that operates on a micro scale, projection. When a nation or a cultural group cannot deal with its own darkness, it projects it onto another. This other becomes the scapegoat, the enemy upon whom all evil and all guilt can be cast. This is how the most monstrous ideologies are born. Nazi Germany, by seeing itself as pure and Aryan, projected its shadow onto the Jewish people, turning them into the receptacle for all evils. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union projected onto each other the image of the evil empire, each refusing to see the tyranny and aggression in their own systems. Look at our world today. The extreme political polarization, the culture wars, the hatred boiling on social media. We see it everywhere. Each side entrenches itself in a position of moral superiority, absolutely convinced of its own light and the total darkness of the adversary. Each side projects its shadow, its intolerance, its dogmatism, its potential for violence onto the other, creating a vicious cycle of hatred that threatens to tear us apart. A society that denies its shadow becomes childish and dangerously susceptible to demagogues. Authoritarian leaders emerge and thrive because they give voice to the repressed shadow of the masses. They legitimize hatred, validate prejudice, and point the finger at the scapegoat, absolving their followers of the difficult task of looking within. That is why the individual work of shadow integration is ultimately the most radical political and social act there is. Every time an individual withdraws a projection, every time a person takes responsibility for their own darkness instead of casting it onto an enemy, A little poison is removed from the collective unconscious. The only cure for the madness of the masses is the sanity of the individual. World peace will not be achieved through superficial treaties and agreements if the psyches that sign them are at war with themselves. True peace begins on the silent battlefield of the human heart, when each of us finds the courage to stop creating external monsters in order to finally make peace with the monster that lives within.